Welcome to this Cambridge Marketing College webinar. My name is Neil Wilkins, one of the tutors at the college, and today we're going to talk about confidence in decision making, particularly when times and situations are uncertain. And that is certainly something that we are all, I guess, facing right now. It is about making sound decisions using judgment, experience, and the available data and evidence when you don't actually know the full answer. So you may not have the full evidence. You may be in an uncertain situation. And that is the time when actually making serious decisions actually becomes quite a pressure, shall we say, from a business and also from a personal perspective. So, what kind of decisions right now are you currently delaying? Because that is often the outcome here, is that you delay a decision because you don't have the full picture, or that you think, oh, well, if I kind of just pause a little bit, something might change to enable me to make a less risky or an easier decision. What kinds of things are you actually delaying right now because the evidence that you have available feels incomplete? That's a really good starting point. And I always find that that's a good way of kind of almost setting the foundation so that you can actually build some ideas and thinking from a position of maybe a little bit of discomfort. Always focuses the mind, that one. So, a lot of decisions in business and particularly in marketing are rarely made with perfect information. That is just the case. That is just the nature of the beast. Budgets, channels, customer behavior, competitors, and platforms, they are all constantly changing. So, waiting for certainty in itself actually becomes its own risk because let's face it, I think if we're being really honest, we know that's never going to actually happen. So the key point here and the key goal is not certainty. The goal is actually having a better decision-making process. So as we go through this session, what I'm hoping to impart to you is to be able to recognize different types of uncertainty because not everything is associated with the same level of risk or the same level of uncertainty. So recognizing different types of uncertainty is important. We're going to look at using evidence without becoming paralyzed by it. We're going to apply practical decision frameworks to enable you to follow a process so you can trust the process. We're going to look to reduce bias and overconfidence in making decisions that you feel, oh, they're a little bit tenuous, but I'm just going to go for it anyway, because this is about confident decision making when there is uncertainty. We're also going to bring into the mix here communicating decisions clearly and defensibly. And again, evidence is everything. So actually having a backup process and having some evidence and data to help you to tell your story is really important. And so overall, we're going to be building confidence through process rather than through guesswork. Now, when I use the word confidence, this is not about certainty. So what we're doing here is we're separating out the idea of being confident with being certain. So you can be confident without being absolutely certain, and you don't have to be absolutely certain to be confident. So this doesn't mean knowing the outcome in advance. It means being able to say, this is the decision we need to make. This is the evidence that we have to support the decision. These are the assumptions that we're basing the decision on. Here are the risks, because not everything is risk-free. This is the best next step that we have with everything that is available to us right now. And this is how we learn from whatever the outcome becomes, whatever the outcome is. So good decisions and good outcomes are not the same thing. So we need to split those two things out. You can confidently make a good decision based on what is being presented and the situation and the context, and you don't have to think, we guarantee here a good outcome. And the same consequently in the other direction. You don't have to think that every good outcome comes from making a good decision. So those two things are not necessarily working together. They can be mutually exclusive. So what actually makes a great decision? Well, a great decision is not that it has a great outcome. Okay, there's a lot of writing, a lot of research, a lot of kind of evidence behind this as being, a really solid statement. A great decision is the result of a good process. In other words, a campaign can underperform even if the decision was sound at the time. And a weak decision can sometimes get lucky. So the key point here is to judge the process as well as the end result. Continuous learning is really at the heart of all of this because the more you do this, the more you separate decisions from outcomes and understand, look, we did the best we could in that moment. With everything that was presented, we made a good decision. The outcome wasn't actually what we wanted, but in the moment, that was a great decision. And that is fine. It's not about being oblivious to the fact that a decision equals an outcome, and okay, they might not be both perfect. This is about a kind of a sensibility of reality. This is about saying, okay, things change, stuff happens, and that's fine. So it is about separating the two, but knowing that they can actually contribute to each other. So the first framework or the first model I want to bring into play here is the concept of decision quality. Okay, so Illinois Tech's decision quality framework, you can look that one up if you're interested in this, states that a high quality decision addresses the core issue and is evaluated against six key elements. So for marketers particularly, I mean, these elements can be simplified down into a clear decision frame, useful alternatives, reliable information, some sound reasoning, clear trade-offs, and a commitment to action. Okay, so if you are doing this in your decision making, so you have a clear decision frame, you know what the alternatives are, and you've got some useful ones in play, so you're making a decision based in the context of those. You've got some reliable information, as good as it can be in the moment. You've got some sound reasoning, so it's not guesswork. You're using kind of good statements and good fact here to work from. You understand the clear trade-offs, so you know that there isn't just one decision point here. It could be binary, that you could be choosing between two options, but there could be more. And you're making trade-offs, knowing that perfection is not going to happen. And then you take a commitment to action, despite what the outcome might be. Because being confident in the decision, as we've said before, is not a reliance on the outcome. It is about, I'm going to take commitment and I'm going to sit with my decision because I know in the moment that was the best decision I could have taken. And then you're not actually then being attached to the outcome. You're not then beating yourself up because things didn't work out right. You're actually confident in saying it was what I could have done in that moment. And I'm going to sit with that and I'm going to own it. And I'm going to take action based on that decision. So can you see what's kind of happening here is you're really taking responsibility for that moment in time when you made the decision. And you're not hanging other stuff off of it, like outcomes, how people are going to react. Was that information that I based the decision on right or wrong? It's almost like those things really don't matter. They're playing a sort of a bit part. They're secondary to the decision. The decision was with best intention, the best thing I could have done in that moment. And that's fine. So that is about taking that confident accountability for that decision in that moment. So let's see if we can break this framework then down into some steps. So step one then would be framing the decision properly. So a poor frame here creates a poor decision. So a weak frame, for example, would be, should we run some more social ads? A much better frame would be, which channel mix gives us the best chance of generating qualified demand from our priority audience within the available budget? Okay, so you can kind of see what's going on here. It's a lot more specific. It's a lot more nuanced and contextualized. It's a bit more smart, if you could say that, rather than vague. Vague does not empower good, confident decision making. It kind of almost sort of fuels the opposite, to be fair. So you can ask here yourself as you go through this, ask what decision are we actually making? What's in the scope? What is out of scope? And what outcomes matter most? So you're kind of starting to build the foundation of the frame for making the decision. Then step two is separating risk from uncertainty. So the risk could be we can estimate probabilities reasonably well. The uncertainty is we do not yet know enough to estimate confidently. And the ambiguity will be, well, we're not even fully agreed on what's happening. So not every decision will need more data. Some decisions just need clearer assumptions. Okay, so this is to stop thinking really in all or nothing terms and instead update your confidence level as new evidence appears. So work with the evidence that you have right now, strip out the stuff that you don't think is really serving the question that is being answered here, and work with confidently the data that you think is going to be both reliable and probably the most accurate that you have in that moment. So this is not just pausing and saying, we just don't have enough data. We haven't filled the pot, so therefore we're not going to decide. It's about waiting for a point and searching for a point where you have enough to take action and make the decision. So that really is separating risk, if you like, from uncertainty. Step three then is using multiple sources of evidence. So this evidence that's coming through here will enable you to kind of rely rather than on one evidence source, which can create false confidence because it's like, well, that sounds really confident as a piece of evidence and that looks good and it's from a reliable source. Therefore, I'm just going to decide on that, and actually taking evidence from a range of different perspectives. And that could be people, it could be data, it could be the original sources. And if you kind of bind those together, you're going to be making a much more confident decision. So it could be stakeholder views, it could be practitioner experience, it could be, your past experience, it could be organization data, it could be some professional research or some science behind stuff. Good marketing example of this blend of multiple sources of evidence would be campaign data, sales feedback, customer research, and maybe wider market evidence before changing your kind of viewpoint, if you like, on the decision that you're going to take. So if you can kind of blend together multiple sources of evidence, you are going to be making decisions in a much more confident, more practical, more reasoned way. And kind of bonded in with that is step four, knowing when enough evidence is enough. A lot of people will fall into, and you might kind of recognize this, the procrastination trap, waiting for just a little bit more information before I decide. So more data can improve decisions, and it might be the right thing to do if you feel and you truly believe that you actually have a lack of data and a lack of evidence to make the decision. I mean, that probably is a sound thing to be kind of checking in with. But if you then take it on to, oh, I'm just going to wait because I'm not that confident, then the framework needs to step in and you need to take a judgment. You need to make a call. So data can improve decisions, but it can also delay them. So ask, will more data realistically change your decision? So if you just had a little bit more, would it really be able to change the decision? If the answer is no, decide now. Is the missing evidence material? I mean, that's again a good one here. Is it actually going to support your decision, or is it just a bit player, a bit part player in the whole decision process? Also, a question is, what is the cost of waiting? Because the cost of waiting could outset or outlie the cost of actually making the decision now. So if you decide now, you might make better progress in any direction, which could be less costly than just sitting and waiting. Another question is, could we test safely instead of debating? Could we just make some moves forward and see what happens? Test out a few next steps rather than just sitting and waiting for the perfect moment. And a final question is, what decision can we make now? And is there anything that should remain open? In other words, could we make a partial decision now based on what we know and maybe just hold back on maybe some elements of that decision? So rather than going in 100%, I mean, could we go 50%? Of course, that is going to depend on the decision itself and actually what you're trying to decide. And of course, that is very personal to the moment and personal to you. But confidence grows when evidence is sufficient enough for you to make a decision, not when evidence is endless, because then I think we both know you are never going to make a decision. And there is, within this kind of makeup, there is a lot of psychology going on. I mean, the concept of bounded rationality at the moment, at this point in the process, will remind us that people make decisions with limited time, attention, and information. And I mean, this often kind of focuses us down in marketing and really will kind of come out when teams are overweight or overweighing recent results. When you follow the loudest opinion, for example, we've all seen that in meetings. When you choose familiar channels just because they are familiar. When you mistake correlation for causation, you see there's a relationship between a decision and an outcome in the past, and then you think, oh, well, that must have caused that. It might not have done, actually. It might have just been part of the cause of it, but there could have been other things in play. And also, it shows up when you avoid difficult trade-offs. So, McKinsey has done a lot of research on this one, and it notes from its research that organizations can put systems in place to reduce bias and improve decision quality, despite all of these things. And so, what we're needing to do again is it comes back to trusting the process. And within that process, we will see personal bias. There'll be a certain way and a certain style that you and others around you, maybe the whole team, maybe your management, make decisions. And so, some useful bias checks are looking at confirmation bias. Are we only seeing evidence that supports our view? Again, that's a dodgy one, isn't it? Because if it is just confirmation bias, in other words, it's just supporting what you think you already believe and what you think you already know, then you're never going to see continuous improvement because all you're doing is fueling stuff in the past. So confirmation bias is a really big one to watch out for because, if there is an alternative view and actually it's better and stronger, come on, step aside of yourself, get out of your own way. I can remember in the past, a number of people have told me over the years, Neil, you've got to step out of your own way there. And as soon as I do, it's like, whoa, there we are. There's the real answer. Oh, I thought I knew the answer. I was getting in my own way. So you might have had that as well. So watch out for that one. Authority bias. This is a big one, particularly in larger organizations and corporates. Are we overvaluing the senior opinion? Just because your manager tells you that this is the right way to do something, hold on a minute. That might be just their view. And because they're in a position of authority, you take that as being gospel truth. It might not be correct. So decision making comes from balancing people's opinions and others, but don't take those as face value correct. Groupthink, as well as another bias, is disagreement disappearing too quickly because everybody just kind of tries to jump in and say, yeah, come on, guys, let's just do this. Whereas actually, the person who had the confidence to say, whoa, guys, let's just stop and pause here. Are we actually just doing this because we've always done it this way? And again, well-established businesses who have a lot of best practice in place often just fall into that trap of, well, we know what we're doing. Whereas actually, that might not be the case. Other biases are we seeing causality in noise? And also, are we continuing because we've already invested in this? That whole kind of idea of sunk cost bias. We can't make an alternative decision because we've already committed resource or we've committed budget or we've committed time to going down this route. So we can't reverse back now. And so you keep going, despite the fact that the evidence is coming in saying, whoa, guys, stop. All of these things can help to almost reframe. If you can address these things, reframe the position and the direction that you're going. So, a practical bias busting habit would be before deciding or before continuing down a route that you know is not serving you well, is ask what would make us change our mind? What do we need to know, or what do we need to see? What evidence do we need to gather that would help us change our mind if we saw that actually it might not be the correct thing that we're doing right now? What evidence contradicts our preferred option? So we're always looking for the yin and the yang, always looking for that. Let's be positively critical here. We've decided to go down this route, but if we just stop here and just question if we're being biased in this decision, what's the actual alternative? What is the opposite of the decision we're taking? And how does that look and feel? It's not necessarily that we're going to go that way, but it's a nice process check. Another question could be, what would a skeptical customer, or you could say business partner, or you could say colleague, what would they say? So skepticism is good. It's not negative. It's just a little bit questioning. It's critical. And it kind of gives you, again, another perspective, another lens through which to look at the decision. Another question you could ask is what would sales, service, or finance challenge? Again, if you're in a particular discipline within marketing or within sales, looking at this from another perspective, another discipline's angle, that can really open up some opportunities to challenge the decisions that you're looking to do. And of course, the final point here, and we're always going to be looking at this one, is are we actually solving the right problem? So as we go after making a decision, making a choice, taking accountability for that, we need to just double check, well, is it the right question that we're making this decision on? And in fact, is the question the right question? Again, almost taking a childlike naivety or innocence with the questions that we raise because we do have experience. We have been here before. We have made a decision like this in the past. So if we were to take a childlike stance and say, I know nothing, this is the first time I've seen this, is that going to then give us a different perspective on the things that we are going to be considering? Could be very interesting if you took that view. And step six, then, moving back into our framework here, is choose the right decision mode because not every situation needs the same approach. So, from a marketing perspective, you might interpret this as making a clear decision. In other words, following best practice, making a complicated decision, which is analyzing and using expertise, making a complex decision, which is about testing step by step, learning and adapting. And maybe from a chaotic perspective, it's acting quickly, stabilizing, then reviewing. Because with all of these decisions that you're taking, they probably are, if you stop and think about them, not decisions that are going to get you to a final outcome, but are decisions that are going to take you to the next step. Now, if you just stop and reflect on that for a moment, when we make decisions, particularly if they feel like they are big decisions, it almost feels like we are making a decision for the outcome. But actually, what we're doing is we're starting to make a decision to align the direction that we're going, almost set the sat nav to get to that outcome. But actually, what we're doing is we're just making a decision that supports our next step. And when you do it in that way, oh, doesn't that land nicely? Doesn't that actually feel a little bit better? Because it means, oh, okay. So I'm doing this decision with good intention. I've done it with the best evidence available, but it gives me also the permission to maybe if something else crops up before we get to the final hurdle, I can actually change my decision. I can adapt my decision, or maybe even just fine tune my decision. Now that feels nice because what that enables me to do is to adjust and really just own it. To be honest, it's not saying, right, I'm going to be stoic and I'm going to be set in my ways. This is a decision that's for the future and I'm never going to challenge it again. No, this is actually quite the opposite. And we might see this play out quite nicely in some marketing examples. Clear could be update an email subject line using established brand rules. Complicated could be choose a media mix using performance data and specialist input. Complex might be enter a new market with uncertain customer behavior. And a chaotic one could be respond to a reputation issue or sudden platform change. So, what we don't need to do is feel that a complicated, confident decision is something that we have to completely and rigidly own forever. What we're able to do is flex. What we're able to do is adjust after we've made the decision. And that doesn't mean we're turning our back on the original decision. What it means is we're enabling ourselves and giving ourselves permission to be flexible. And that allows us to be really confident in that first decision because it doesn't tie us down. It doesn't lock us into, well, I've got to stick with that. It far from it, and actually the opposite. And what it enables is step seven, which is the ability then to factor in scenario thinking in our decision making. Because even if we need to react quickly, even if we need to make a snap decision in the moment, we can, if we bring in some scenarios, either with our teams or just reflecting by ourselves, it enables us to look at the expected case and maybe the upside of the case, maybe the downside of the case, and then think about what would we do differently in each of these case examples. So if we see an absolutely reality case, this is what I'm expecting to happen now from this decision I'm taking. Okay, yeah, I can go with that. It's as good as I can do for now. That's fine. And if there was an upside, oh, okay, well, that's going to give us that opportunity going forward beyond this next step. Okay, well, I can adjust, can't I, going forward? And if there's a downside, well, because I've given myself the permission to adjust if something else comes into the mix, or if I get more evidence and I can review the original decision and I can then move forward, I'm becoming a little bit more flowy. So there's a little bit of an energy flow here that's going to give me very different levels of confidence than I would have otherwise had. And step eight, in alignment with that scenario planning, is potentially to run a pre-mortem. So rather than a post-mortem, in other words, reviewing things after they've happened, is to actually look at it in advance. And of course, this makes it very much safer for people to speak up about reservations they have during planning, for you to actually question and think, well, okay, if I was to run this, and I would do this maybe if I was doing some kind of major campaign or a product launch, or maybe some budget reallocation, maybe some big ticket public changes to my website or to some automation projects or CRM. So, important stuff. If I was to run a pre-mortem, in other words, actually use those scenarios and plot those out as, okay, if this actually did happen, what would I do? Where would I be? Where would we as a team be? How would our brand look? What would the customers think? And actually run it as a scenario that's actually already happened. So rather than waiting for that outcome, is actually do it now and actually buy yourself a little bit of time to run those things. So questions in a pre-mortem could be asking the team, if it's 6 months from now and this decision failed, why? Another question could be, what assumption proved wrong? Which stakeholders were not aligned? What customer behavior did we misunderstand? And what would have helped us spot this earlier? This is a really great way of building confidence, and it will increase your confidence because risks will have been named before they become surprises. I love this pre-mortem thing. And of course, with AI, you can bring your AI into play here and start to say with your AI, tell me what the likely outcome is going to be to this. And let's kind of work with that as a scenario. What do you think? What could we change now? What could we decide differently now based on what we know is a possible actual outcome? And let's change it now. Rather than waiting it to come as a surprise, let's make the change now. How do you feel that might affect your decision making? Because surely, from a confidence perspective, it shows that you've picked up those little stones and looked underneath and seen what could actually pop up as a surprise. I love that one because I am a relatively risk averse person. So to know what the likely risks are and play those out and actually make a decision now based on, well, there's a likely outcome of that risk. If I have to make a decision to go down that path versus the path over there, knowing what is coming, and if you're kind of a very planful person who you like a good itinerary, that's going to sound good, isn't it? So knowing those things can really help you. And step nine then is then putting that into the decision-making mix. And this is about reducing the uncertainty. Remember, we're here to make confident decisions under uncertainty. Well, what we're doing is we're not necessarily actually practically reducing the risk, but what we're doing is we are certainly kind of planning for the uncertainty by creating options, not just one recommendation. So under uncertainty, a single favored option can become fragile. And I would much rather, if it was me, having some decisions that we can take that enabled us to maybe take option B if option A does not play out in the way that was expected. So actually running a contingency alongside option A, maybe it's a covert, well, maybe you don't even have to announce that that is an option B, but actually having it there will enable you to take a confident decision in option A, knowing that this thing has got your back. So if things go horribly wrong, you're covered. You've done the pre-mortem, so you're not really going to get any surprises. You've thought of all the scenarios that could crop up, and you've created some options for you, which takes you beautifully into step 10, which is making the decision explicit. A strong decision statement includes the decision made, reason for it, the evidence used, the assumptions accepted, the risks recognized, the owner, and it probably is you, or it could be some others in collaboration, and the review point. So a good example would be we'll increase paid search spend by 20% for 4 weeks because qualified inquiry conversion is stronger than paid social. We've got the evidence to see that. We assume search demand remains stable and we'll review cost per qualified lead weekly. Wow. Isn't that a good decision process under the uncertainty of all of those things rather than just, yeah, let's go and spend some more money? That feels so much weaker, doesn't it? Rather than the really explicit conditions under which you're making your decision. To me, that feels so much more robust, accountable, confident, measurable, and also not just time bound, but also adjustable. So if any of those things do move, as they will, undoubtedly, because as we said, everything is based on uncertainty, then at least we've got a plan B to revert to, and we probably can identify very quickly and confidently what went wrong. And if we can then communicate uncertainty and in a professional sense, so rather than just saying, well, this budget spend's definitely going to work, or the data proves it, look, so that's why we're doing it, or there's no risk associated with this, or, well, we feel this is right, and actually saying the evidence suggests our current judgment is, our main assumption is, the key risk is, we'll review this when, and our confidence level is medium because, I mean, doesn't that sound much more professional, clear, and not a false certainty? Nobody wants that because that will enable a lot of kind of questioning to come through. But if you do this decision, communicate it in that kind of way based on the evidence, well, we know there's uncertainty, that's already baked in, but managing it in this kind of way, well, isn't that a nicer, more solid, more robust way to feel confident that you've got this? And then step 11, using a decision log. So logging this stuff down, because wouldn't this be great to actually help prevent sort of hindsight bias where it was like, yeah, well, we could have made the wrong choice. And, but, oh, look, if only we'd known, or, going back. And it's like, well, we can never make a decision at that point again because. So this hindsight bias, hindsight is a useful thing, but is a very unuseful thing if used wrong. And of course, that will support your learning over time if you use a decision log, because then you can see where those moments actually didn't actually quite play out in the way that you thought, but you took the best decisions in the best possible time frame with the best evidence available, with the confidence level that was set in this point that gave this actual outcome. And also it logged what you learned. And it's learning without blaming the decision unfairly. So when the result is known, at the end of the process, you can say, was the decision process good? You can also ask, was the outcome affected by luck or external change? And where was that in the process? Definitely ask which assumption was wrong or which assumptions didn't support what we gave and what we gave as a decision. What would we know earlier next time? What could we know? Where should we know stuff? Did we collect the amount of evidence at the right points to support the ongoing flow of that decision? And really importantly, what should be repeated, changed, or stopped? So going back to your decision log and refining it and learning from it so that in your mind, as well as on your chart, you can actually then be using this experience in a really practical way as part of, well, what you might term a decision toolkit. So you can constantly learn and you can constantly improve your next important decision. So for me, if I was doing this, I would have a very practical decision toolkit that would look something like defining the decision, really smart definition of the decision, clarifying the objective, gathering multiple evidence sources as far as you can in the moment, identifying any assumptions but checking for bias, building my options, assessing the risk and reversibility of those options, running, if I can, a pre-mortem, so more than just a scenario, but an actual pre-mortem, deciding and documenting what the decision process is going to be and when and how I'm going to make my decision and documenting it in the way that we've said, and then reviewing and learning from the output or the outcome. So for now, from this point, if you were to follow that through, which step would most improve your next important decision? Is there something in that mix? Maybe just choose one thing there that you're not doing right now that you could do the next time. I'm not saying do better. I'm just saying just do. Just actually add into your decision making, particularly if it's an uncertain decision, because this is where, it's really going to show some impact. And then think, okay, well, if I was to do that as part of my decision making, let's reflect and see how that then impacts on the outcome. And then I can learn from that. Maybe then choose another one in a different decision and take that one through the process. So this is ongoing learning, exploration, and reflection. And for me, the key takeaways really of going through this process are really recognizing that marketing decisions often happen before the full picture is available. And I think what you're seeing is you don't really need the full picture at all. And this is knowing that the strongest marketers really do not wait for perfect certainty. What they do is they frame the decision clearly. They use the best available evidence so that they can work smartly and quickly. They test the assumptions, reducing bias, and then they communicate that decision honestly whilst learning from the outcomes. So the confidence here is not the absence of uncertainty, but it really is the discipline to decide well within it. And that is confident decision making when you feel uncertain.